going to begin today by presenting some background information. And I do so for a couple of reasons. One is I want you to understand just how passionate I am about the topic of parenting. And the other is I want to share with you a little bit about the unique set of experiences which I've had, which lead me to be both comfortable and confident with the advice that I'm going to be offering today. And by the way, if you're familiar with the book that Emrys just mentioned, the advice today is going to be diametrically opposed to the message that is in the Tiger Mother book. So in terms of the background information, I have to go back to 1987 when I had some room in my teaching schedule because a course was being postponed. It wasn't being eliminated, just postponed. So I could offer on a one-time only basis any course of my choice. And I was debating between offering a course on health psychology, which deals with the influence of psychological factors on physical health, or offering a course on parenting. The health psychology course would have been a very easy preparation for me because it closely relates to other things that I taught at the time. The parenting course, on the other hand, would have been a brand new preparation. I had never taken a course in parenting. I had never even attended a college or a university that offered a course on parenting, and there are very few today that actually even offer courses. That always surprised me because it always seemed to me that even before I was a parent, and in 1967 I was a father of 2 children, and I had been, my first child was born 6 years previous. But it always seemed to me that parenting, even before I became a parent, was a very complex kind of job. And I just never understood why we didn't have available an opportunity to learn about doing that complex job. I couldn't think of any other complex jobs where there are not a lot of opportunities available to learn before you actually do the job. In any case, I was debating between these 2 courses, and this was a very busy point in my life, probably the busiest actually if I think back on it. 3 things were occupying a lot of my time. I was taking care of my younger daughter, who at the time I was making this decision was 2, but I had already been taking care of her for a year and a half and was continuing to do so. Taking care of her every day from early in the morning until early in the afternoon. And then I was a full-time faculty member here teaching a full load in the afternoons and evenings, and of course that meant for a lot of preparation on the weekend and grading on the weekend. And the third thing that kept me very busy was I was the person who had primary responsibility for the oversight of the Alfred Montessori School. This was a preschool, is a preschool, it's still in existence, which I helped to found in 1983. So it was in its infancy and needed a lot of time and attention. So between childcare, a full-time job, and oversight of the Montessori School, I was busier than I was ever, I think, at any point in time. I guess we'll go back here a second, jumping ahead. And so I made a decision to actually go with the health psychology course, simply because it was the easiest preparation, and I didn't really have a lot of time, even though my heart really was within the parenting course. But I just didn't see how I could find the time to prepare it with all the other responsibilities. But a phone call from a total stranger changed all that. Had that phone call not come, I probably wouldn't be here today. The phone call involved a survey. The last question on the survey was, what is the most significant problem facing our country? The choices were very similar to, I think, what you'd hear today. The economy, racial tensions, the environment, crime rate, and then, as with all the questions, you could pick none of the above. I had zipped through the whole telephone survey until this last question, never choosing none of the above. And I began to really think about this question, so much so that the person on the other end said to me, "Are you still there, sir?" And I said, "Yes, I'm really having trouble with this question." And finally I answered none of the above. And I could tell from the tone of her voice that this was a very unusual response, because obviously she had laid out some of the major issues. And she said, "Sir, there's a space on the form where I can write down what you think is the most significant problem if you want to share it with me." And I said, "Yeah, I'd be happy to share it with you." And so in 1987, I thought the most significant problem facing our country today actually is exactly the same problem facing our country today. And I truly believe it's the way children are being raised. I think parents, on average, do a very poor job. And I think if you think about the other choices I was given, racial tensions, the environment, the crime rate, all these things are highly connected to the way children have been raised. And it seemed to me the most fundamental problem that could extend to everything, and I could even argue the economy if I had time, has to do with the way we raise children. And so when I hung up the phone, I realized really for the first time just how passionate I was about the topic and how important I really thought parenting was. And I knew then, no matter how busy I was, that I really needed to find the time to put together a course on parenting, even though it was to be only a one-time only offering, because again, the course was only delayed, not eliminated, that I normally taught. And so I did offer a course. 14 students took it. It was taught as a seminar. We had 4 books. We read the books. We came together and talked about the books, and we had highly stimulating, very interesting, sometimes heated discussions on the material. It was really a lot of fun to teach. I knew as a result of teaching the course that my parenting was improving. And I was very curious at the end of the semester what the students would think, especially since at that particular group of students, none of them were parents. They weren't yet parents, yet they were taking a parenting course. And so at the end of the semester, I was very pleased with the course evaluations. I had already been teaching 17 years at the time, and I actually was used to positive course evaluations, but I had never received any quite as strong. But what really impressed me the most were the students who bothered to come into my office, sometimes in pairs, sometimes individually, to basically insist that this be made a regular offering. They said, Dr. Lichtman, you must make this a regular offering. This course is too important. It's too valuable. They were insisting. It was a very interesting experience for me. A bunch said it should be required of all psychology majors, and I think what really sort of tipped the scale for me to actually make it a regular offering were a group of students who actually were very serious about this. They said that this course should be required of every Alfred University student before they graduate. So I knew when you get that kind of feedback, you knew you have something of value. And so I did adjust what I normally taught, and I began to offer on a regular basis what originally started out as a one-time only course. I began to offer it, and I am now teaching it for the 80th and 81st time. Now, that gives me a unique set of experiences to draw from in 2 ways. As part of the seminar, students often, they're not required to do this, but they often share with the class various strategies their parents used, what worked, what didn't work. And so I would say 3/4 of the students, so I have 15 students times 80, 1,200 students, about 900 students have actually, in some depth, talked to me about how they were raised and what the outcomes were. And the other point, of course, which you probably couldn't anticipate, is that since 1,200 students have completed the course, there's an awful lot of people out there who are now raising children who took this course, and I get emails, and of course on alumni weekend, etc., get a lot of feedback. And the feedback I get is that this stuff works. And so therefore I have some confidence in providing you with some advice on raising self-directed and caring children. I'm going to focus on 3 main topics today of tremendous importance to all parents and all children: self-esteem, discipline, and parenting styles, which are closely linked to each other, and then parenting of adolescents. So we'll begin with self-esteem. The first thing that I want to do is differentiate between what is meant by self-concept and self-esteem. Self-concept refers to characteristics and abilities that you see in yourself. So do you see yourself as tall, short, good-looking, not so good-looking? Do you see yourself as having patience or not so much patience? Do you see yourself as, where do you see yourself in terms of intelligence and creativity? So how you see yourself, specific characteristics and abilities. Self-esteem is a little different. It's related, but it's a little different. Self-esteem refers to the value that you place on who you are. Do you really like yourself? Are you really proud of who you are? Now, it's certainly likely that you're going to like yourself if you have a lot of positive characteristics and abilities, if your self-concept is positive, but not necessarily. And so I think this is an important thing for parents to understand, and that is that a positive self-concept is not always connected to a high level of self-esteem. And I think the best way really to communicate this is in the form of a picture. And so your job is to figure out who is in this picture and what she is doing. So this is a picture of Oprah Winfrey taken in 1988, just after she lost 67 pounds. And what she is doing is a little less obvious, but she has a children's wagon in which she has a large plastic bag and 67 pounds of fat that she got from a butcher shop. I actually happened to watch this show back in 1988 when it occurred. And what I remember from that show was Oprah clearly communicating at that time that before she lost the weight, that her self-esteem was not very, very high. She really didn't like herself deep down. And here's obviously a person bright, talented, rich, famous, has all these positive things going for her, but yet she suffered from low self-esteem. This is more, actually I think she's heavier than this today, but this is the most, she's often around 200 pounds in weight. So I think it's important for parents to understand that you can have a child who seems to be highly talented and, creative and all these kinds of things, good looking and all these things, but if there is something that they crave, in this case thinness, but it could be popularity, and they're not very popular, they may in fact suffer from low self-esteem. Okay. What are the benefits of having high self-esteem? And then we'll talk about how you can build a child's self-esteem. Well, the benefits of high self-esteem really fall into two categories. One is, without it, you can't really be happy. And the other is, with it, there's a much higher probability that you're going to be successful at a lot of things. And so as you can see here, and this is only a part of a long list which I could have put up, as you can see here, people with high self-esteem are happier, more optimistic, more confident, more assertive, more self-directed. The self-directed part, I think, probably is fairly obvious, but if you have confidence in yourself and you don't question who you are and how capable you are, then it's much easier for you to assert yourself. It's much easier for you to steer your own course. If you second-guess yourself, then you're going to be more dependent on other people for guidance and advice. And at the bottom, it points out, again, the correlation. It's not causal. Obviously, Oprah was very successful but had low self-esteem. But in general, people who have high self-esteem are more likely to do better in life. What can parents do to help children build their self-esteem? The single most important thing I've listed first, and I think that a lot of parents do not realize the many ways in which they actually do not treat their child in a respectful manner. Some of the things that parents routinely say to kids, they say without really thinking. Let me read you a few. How did I end up with a kid like you? You're just a kid. What do you know anyway? When are you going to grow up? You're too young to understand. You're not big enough to do that. It's stupid to be afraid of the dark. All of these statements, if you really sort of think about them, if a friend of yours were to say some of these things to you, it's stupid for you to be afraid of whatever you're afraid of, that would not be a respectful statement. That would really be a put-down. And parents can communicate the same thing in different words. So, for instance, if you, instead of saying it's stupid to be afraid of the dark, you might say lots of people are afraid of the dark, even though there really is little to fear about the dark. It's a very different message to give a child. Or you might say, instead of you're not big enough to do that, you might say this is difficult to do, so let's work on it together. Or instead of you're too young to understand, you might say this is complicated, but since you have a good head on your shoulders, I bet there's a good chance that you'll be able to understand, and then proceed to explain to the child whatever it is complex. And so this is one way in which I think parents actually, in some ways, do not really fully treat a child with respect. Another way is that they often don't pay full attention to the child. And so they might be texting, or they might be on their computer, or they might be watching television, and the child comes into their house, and they continue to do those kinds of things, and as the child is talking to them. Again, this really, we're not giving a child full attention, stopping, at least temporarily, what you're doing, or saying to the child, in 5 minutes I'll be able to talk with you because I've got to complete this. That's a more respectful way to deal with things. A third, and there are many examples, but I'm only going to give one more, is that a lot of parents don't consult children on things that directly affect them. So, for instance, you're redecorating the house, and the child doesn't have a choice of what color their room's going to be painted, or what furniture is going to go in their room. Or you're going on a family vacation, you tell the child where you're going, and you don't ever sort of communicate and ask the child where the child might be interested in going, or et cetera. So it could be just going out to dinner, and the child must, in some cases, assuming that you can afford this, the child has to eat off of the children's menu, even if the child would prefer something on the regular menu. There are a lot of examples of this, and I don't want to dwell on it because there are a lot of other things to cover, but I think you can get the idea about respect being important. Providing unconditional, positive regard or love. A lot of parents tie the love and the affection that they extend to their children to the children doing what they want them to do and doing certain things at a high level. So some parents actually, in subtle ways, withhold affection or love if the child is only a B student and they want the child to be an A student, or if the child is not interested in certain activities that the parent would really like the child to be interested in, or if the child is gay and the parent would really prefer the child to be straight. A lot of times, the parents really make their love contingent upon the kid's behavior. This really is not good for a child's self-esteem. It also relates to the next item here. A lot of parents say, just do your best. But ultimately, what they really mean is just be the best. And they take the position that if you're a B student, if you only worked harder, you would become an A student. Or if you're a second stringer on a sports team, if you only worked harder, you would make the first string team. This really is nonsense if you think about it, because there are four things that determine, major things, you could add some others, but four major things that determine success on anything. One of them, and the only one of them that the child has control of, is how hard the child works. But the other three things the child doesn't have control over. One are the genetics, the genes that the child inherited. No matter how hard you work at something, if you don't have the right genetic makeup, you're not going to be tops at that item. It doesn't matter what it is. A second factor I would call the mentoring. And under mentoring, I would include the quality of the parenting, the quality of the teaching, the quality of the coaching, the quality of the guidance. If you don't have a very good teacher, it's harder to learn the material, and the child doesn't choose his or her own teacher. The third item is luck. If you go out for the team at a particular year when a dozen great athletes go out for the team, your chances of being a starter are greatly reduced. If you're looking for a job in today's economy, your chances of getting a good job are greatly reduced than what they were just a short time ago when we had a much lower unemployment rate. So there's luck involved. And so if a parent is always pressuring a kid to do better, just work harder, they're forgetting the fact that there are three other factors the child doesn't control. And this, of course, brings down self-esteem because they're always getting the message, you're not good enough. Related to that is the next item, which is don't overemphasize any one characteristic. I want to tell two quick stories here. These are true stories of students who I knew who graduated 15, 20 years ago, a long time ago. And in both cases, their parents were stressing something that these kids actually had a high level of. But the parents stressed it so much that it actually brought down the child's self-esteem rather than boosted the child's self-esteem. In one case, a student who I got to know quite well, I sort of said to her one day when she was in my office just coming to chat, I said, I sense that your self-esteem isn't as high as it could be. And she said, you're exactly right. My self-esteem is extremely low. And I said, well, tell me a little bit about that. She says, I'm just not smart enough. Well, this surprised me because, she had earned an A in my course, and I thought she was quite bright. I had many conversations with her outside of class. And I said, well, why do you get this idea that you're not smart enough? She said, well, in my family, intelligence is the one thing that is most stressed. It was always stressed from the time I was a little kid. And there are a lot of very bright people in my family, and there are some that are actually brighter than me, some of my cousins, and this has always troubled me. And I said to her, well, have you ever taken an IQ test? It was a little risk on my part, but I was pretty sure if she ever took a test, she would have done fairly well. And she said, well, they don't count anyway. I don't believe in those IQ tests. And I really had to press her before she finally told me that she had taken 3 IQ tests, each time scoring around 140. So statistically, that places her in the top 1% when it comes to intelligence. But that wasn't good enough. And her self-esteem really suffered because she never got to the highest level. And this is what her parents stressed. Another student, another woman, who was an excellent athlete, a great student, and in my mind was stunningly beautiful. The same story. Eventually I get to know her. I ask her, why? Tell me about your self-esteem. And she says, it's not very good. And I said, well, why? And she said, it's because of my appearance. I almost fell off my chair. And I said to her, what do you mean? She said, well, I'm just not attractive enough. And so again, I took a risk, and I said, well, in this college population, where do you see yourself? In the top half of the women on campus? The top quarter? And her answer was, literally, number 7 or 8. And she then proceeded to name 7 or 8 women. I didn't know who they were. I wish I did, but I didn't know who they were. She then proceeded to name 7 or 8 women. And she knew where she was. And that wasn't good enough for her. 1,000 women roughly on campus, and she's 7 or 8. Again, in the top 1%. So and her family, when I went on to probe, her family stressed appearance. They put a lot of money and time into makeup and clothing and this kind of stuff. And she had, relatives who were, she claimed, more attractive than she was. I wish I was looking for them at graduation. I just never saw them. In any case, I think it's very important not to overemphasize any one thing. Even if your kid is talented in that sport or particularly attractive or particularly bright, I think you're making a very big mistake. Because they get the idea they always have to be the best. You all have heard stories of students, who are the valedictorian at their local high school, and they go to an Ivy League college and they commit suicide. Because everyone there is a valedictorian and they're not special anymore, and they always had to be the best. They can no longer be the best. Encourage independence, and one of the best ways to do this is guide and step aside. This is one of the hardest things for parents to do. Parents always want to do things for kids. Let me pour your milk. Let me pick out your clothing. Let me help you clean your room. A bunch of things. When kids get the message that they never can quite do it right, that they might spill the milk and that's a problem or something like that, it's really important for parents to provide a little guidance and then step aside. Not when health and safety issues are involved, but if obviously there you have to not give the kid any choices. They have to wear a helmet if they're riding the bicycle. It's not like you give some guidance. But in general, this is very important to empower children so that they have some control over things, and the stepping aside is the hardest thing for parents. One of the things that makes that extremely hard today is the longest umbilical cord in the world, better known as the cell phone. If you think about it, kids can get in touch with their parents anytime, and a lot of students, including college students, are calling their parents multiple times a day. Whenever anything happens, rather than figuring it out for themselves, the parents are doing making the decisions and providing the guidance. They're not able to step aside. And I think the cell phone actually is partly responsible for that. There are other reasons. Focus on catching your kid being good. This is maybe one of the most obvious things when kids hear lots of positive statements about themselves that, it was great that you helped your brother find his shoe, or I like the way you shared your toys. This obviously builds their self-esteem. When they hear mostly negative things about themselves, such as don't do that, or stop, doing that, or why didn't you do that, or you didn't do that right, when they hear those kinds of things repeatedly, that certainly brings down their self-esteem. And a lot of parents ignore behavior as long as the kid isn't making a disturbance, the parents sort of tiptoe around. But once the kid does something, then the parent interacts, and they provide essentially negative feedback, which brings down self-esteem. I want to move now to discipline and parenting style. There are two goals of discipline. Most parents have this as the goal. Most parents see discipline this way, which is unfortunate. Most parents see discipline as the child does something, a misbehavior. I punish the child. The child will not repeat the misbehavior because they won't want to pay the price. They won't want to be punished again, whether the punishment is a spanking or the punishment is taking away, the TV time or whatever it is. And so the idea here is this is the way most parents approach discipline. The child is not going to do it again because the price is too high to pay. A goal that makes a lot more sense for discipline is to approach discipline as the teaching of a set of values for the child to live by. This is a very different approach than seeing discipline as the child will not repeat the misbehavior because they won't want to pay the price. Very important. And we have a society today, really, where the values are absolutely despicable, I guess I might say. And it's a failure on the part of parents. I think it's largely because of the discipline style. Let me give you some examples. So here's a survey of 30,000 students just done a short time ago. And within the past year, 30% admit to stealing from a store. Okay? High school students. 64% admit to cheating on a test. 82% said they lied to their parents about something significant. But I think the most disturbing part of this survey is this. They did not see themselves as having a problem with their character or their ethics. And they thought they were better than most. This tells you what the norm is out there today. And I think it's largely, again, because we haven't been effective at teaching values. We focus too much on stopping misbehavior by the child having to pay a price. Now, the way that you accomplish this is through good communication and role modeling as opposed to through punishment. So, if you want your child to learn the value of honesty, you have to live that value. So, you don't say to the child when the phone rings, if so-and-so is calling, tell them I'm not home. You don't tell the child, wow, today we're lucky, we got extra change in the store. Look, we got $3 too much change. You walk back in the store with the child, you hand the cashier the money, and that's a teaching opportunity. You must live what it is you want your child, the values you want your child to adopt. And you need to talk with them about this. It's not just living it, you need to discuss this. It's important to have a dialogue all the time going about the values you hope your children will acquire. The use of spanking. About 85% of American parents spank as a form of discipline. I could do a separate Bergen forum on spanking, actually, but the best reason not to spank, which I know most of this audience will not believe, but the best reason not to spank is because if you use other forms of discipline, like good communication and role modeling and maybe time out or something like this, if you need to use punishment, if you use other forms of discipline, your children will be better behaved. A very short time ago, 15 of the top developmental psychologists in the country were asked to review all the literature on the use of corporal punishment, that is, inflicting pain, usually through spanking, but there's other ways to inflict pain, as a way of controlling kids or disciplining kids. And what they basically said is it doesn't work, and it should really be eliminated. And not only doesn't it work, but it results in kids being more poorly behaved. And it also creates anxiety and depression, and the cognitive development of kids who have been raised where parents communicate and talk is higher than when parents actually use spanking as a form of punishment. So I know that because the vast majority of people were spanked in this room, the vast majority of people think they turned out okay, the vast majority of people therefore think spanking is okay. But that doesn't really make sense. The way to determine whether spanking makes sense is to compare it to other forms of discipline. Let me just do a quick analogy. The vast majority of people who smoke do not develop cancer. Only about 14% of people who smoke develop cancer. So does that mean that smoking isn't that harmful? You have to compare it to the people who do not smoke. If you don't smoke, lung cancer, I'm just talking about lung cancer. If you do not smoke, there's only a 1.4% chance of developing lung cancer. So there's a 10 times greater likelihood of developing lung cancer, even though the vast majority of people who smoke do not develop lung cancers. So the vast majority of people who were spanked turn out fine. But if you're looking at the statistics, you would not be using spanking as a form of discipline because it just doesn't work as well. The other thing about spanking is that it is essentially a parent role modeling the use of power and force to control. And if you do this, you're going to be teaching your child to also use his or her force and power to control other children. We have a huge problem. It's been in the news in the past couple of months. And this is a survey that was done very recently, obviously last year. A large survey, and again, in the past year, 52% of 15 to 18-year-olds indicated that they hit someone because they were angry. Well, when parents are angry, they often spank. So the kids are just doing what the parents taught them to do. And 28% said that was fine. That wasn't really a problem. They weren't sorry that they hit. It's nice that at least 72% were sorry they did so. Bullying, this has been in the news. 50% of students indicate that in anonymous surveys that they bullied another kid. Well, in some ways, I view parents spanking as sort of, again, using power to control another person. And there's a connection, I think. I think there are a lot of reasons for bullying. I think this is one of them. And also, we have a situation where 47% of kids indicate that they were bullied in some way that was really deeply upsetting. So again, when I say I think we have a whole society of young people who have not adopted a set of values that really make a lot of sense. If they did, they wouldn't be bullying at this level, and they certainly wouldn't be lying, cheating, or stealing at the levels that I just previously showed you. So again, parents are not doing a very good job when it comes to teaching values. Again, focus on catching your kid being good. This not only builds self-esteem, as I previously mentioned, but it also helps children to get parental attention for good behavior. You know, if parents don't give kids much attention, they're going to figure out a way to get parents' attention. And that way may be, you know, harassing their siblings, so their sibling cries and runs, and then you yell at them. Yelling at a kid who doesn't get much attention where you think it's a punishment actually is serving as a reward or a reinforcement to actually strengthen the probability that they will torment their sibling again if this is the only way they can get attention. So if kids can get lots of attention for doing the right thing, they have less reason to do the wrong thing. And, of course, as a parent, then you have fewer disciplinary issues. Different parenting styles. This is actually quite important. This is in the news these days with the Tiger Mom, which is basically an authoritarian parenting style. There are three main parenting styles. Authoritarian is a parenting style in which is basically a dictatorship, and in which the parent is in total control. I'm going to go over these each in more detail in a second. Permissive is really a situation where the child runs the show. The child gets his or her way, and the third parenting style, which is the parenting style that the research absolutely by far shows has the very best results on virtually every measure that has been evaluated with children, is an authoritative parenting style, which is sort of a team approach, a democratic kind of approach, where neither the parent is in full control, the child is running the show, but they're working together. So let's quickly go through some of the characteristics of the authoritarian parenting style. Parent, again, wants to be in control. They don't want self-controlled children. That actually is the opposite of what they're looking for. They give lots of orders and few choices. They prefer to use power and threats and harsh punishments rather than reason and persuasion to get the child to comply. They do not take the time often to explain the reasons for the rules or policies. When asked by the child, they see this sometimes as a threat. Why are you threatening me? Why are you asking me anything? And they say, the reason why you do it is because I said so. Okay? And they believe really that children should be seen and not heard. Now, these last two items clearly are disrespecting children. Again, so this is a parenting style which lowers children's self-esteem and which also obviously results in children who have not learned how to be self-directed because they've never been given that opportunity. Their parents have never guided and stepped aside. They don't step aside. Their parents are there all the time telling them what to do. And there's harsh punishments if they don't. So they don't really think a lot about why they're doing what they're doing. They just live in fear of the punishment. And so this is really not a very effective parenting style. The permissive parenting style, there are few rules, and if the child happens to disobey rules, if there are any, there's really no consequence. The parent usually doesn't punish the child, actually. And they have few expectations or demands on the kids. Kids never reach their full potential when this parenting style is applied because there's not much that you're expecting out of your child, and, children often live up, at least in part, to what their parents expect them to live up to. And if the parents don't expect much out of the kids, they're not going to expect much out of themselves. These are the spoiled brats, the parents who often indulge their kids if they cry or have a temper tantrum. The parents give in. The parents, and in my parenting seminar, lots of students want to be the friend of their future children, or if they have children, they want to be the buddy, the friend. This is really not in the best interest of your child. You really need to be the person in charge, and we generally are not in charge of our friends. And so this idea of a parent functioning more like a friend really is not a good thing. Again, lenient and little supervision means that these kids often get into a lot of trouble. They also don't have very high self-esteem. Again, there's nothing much expected of them. Anything goes. They have nothing to live up to. So again, it really doesn't work very well if you want kids to, they don't learn to be self-directed because there's nothing that they really had to ever control. Anything went. So how do you become self-directed or self-controlled? You really can't. Authoritative parenting style. Parents establish rules and guidelines for the children to follow. And the most important thing is they explain why to the child. Their goal is to, again, have the child believe that stealing, lying, and cheating is wrong. They need to know why. Not because I don't do it because if I do it I'm going to get clobbered. I don't do it because I really don't believe it's the right thing to do. And of course, kids are often in situations where the probability of being caught and found out and punished may be low. And in those situations, they actually have a high probability of engaging in the misbehavior. Some research done not too long ago on a college campus involved asking male students, would they either engage in date rape or seriously consider engaging in date rape if they were 100% guaranteed there would never be a price to pay. The person they raped would never tell another soul on the planet. 35% of the men said they would either do it or seriously consider it. So again, in situations where they don't think there's a possibility of being caught, if you don't teach people values, they're going to cheat, steal, lie, rape, or whatever the situation is. Again, obviously they prefer reason and persuasion. This, I think, is obvious. And they allow children to challenge the logic of their policies. and their rules. I'll give a quick personal example. When I was about 9 or 10, as usual, my mother made a maple icing cake for my birthday. To this day, I still have cakes with maple icing to my birthday. And I remember coming down, it was a Saturday, I remember coming down and seeing half the cake lying on the plate, and I wanted it for breakfast. And my parents had rules, but they also allowed me to challenge them, and to occasionally they would make exceptions or bend the rules or change the rules or eliminate the rules. And that really empowered me as a child, because I felt like I could, I was respected. I could stand up. And so I thought for the longest time. I was getting hungrier and hungrier. I said, how am I going to convince my parents? This is the era before donuts. Donuts you could find now almost on every street corner. But donuts were not a common item in those days. And I finally figured it out. And I said, Mom and Dad, they both were there. I said, can you tell me the difference in the ingredients between this maple iced cake and the pancakes that Dad makes about it once a month that we have maple syrup on? They couldn't. They said, okay, we don't have pancakes all the time because it's not the healthiest food, but you can have that cake for breakfast. And maple cake never tasted better before or after that time. So again, this empowers kids. When kids can sort of stand up to their parents and explain whatever the situation is, that a rule can be changed or not, they're, again, learning to be self-directed kids. You're giving them that opportunity, so it becomes important. Obviously, my parents treated me in a kind and respectful manner, so that goes without saying. This style, regardless of what you measure, success in relationships, you measure divorce rate, whatever it is you measure, compared to the other two styles, by far, you're going to see a much better outcome using this style. Parenting of adolescents in 4 or 5 minutes. Should parents look forward to the adolescent years with fear and trepidation? Well, I would argue that if you've done all the right things up to this point, the amount of fear and trepidation would be a little less. But the answer still is yes. Okay. And it's yes because if you look at the behavior patterns of adolescents, there's a lot of risky behavior. These are some examples. So we have essentially 2/3 who are having sexual intercourse before they leave high school. The next thing is even more disturbing to me personally, and that is we have fewer than 50% reliably using contraceptives, and we have 1/3 leaving high school with a sexually transmitted disease. 60% of 12th graders have been drunk. 45% on average of college students binge drink. And 30% in the last month here, as you notice, 30% of adolescents have been in a car with someone who has been drinking. So it seems to me that there's a lot of good reason to have some fear and trepidation as the adolescent years approach. Reducing risk behavior in adolescence, you must lead by example. If you go riding with your child without your bicycle helmet, you're making a big mistake. If you smoke and are obese, you're not communicating to your child that it's important to protect their body. So how important it is if they get a sexually transmitted disease. I mean, you must, as a parent, be living this, and you must be role modeling this. And so therefore, if you don't want your child to be taking risks, you can't be doing this. You can't come home from work and say, I had a tough day, I need a drink. That's a message that your child is going to pick up and increase the chances that they will be abusing alcohol. Communicating with kids is of fundamental importance, and it should be before they are sexually active or likely to be involved in drugs. The research clearly shows when you have discussions with children about these topics in advance of them becoming active, the probability of them engaging in risky behaviors dramatically decreases. High self-esteem allows them to withstand peer pressure. You know, peer pressure is tremendous. I don't care in all kids, no matter how you raise them. But if you raise a child who's high in self-esteem, they can risk being rejected by the group if the group is doing something that they see as highly dangerous. If you raise a child who's very low in self-esteem, the need to belong to the group, to feel good about yourself, is so high that it's unlikely that they will resist. Obviously, authoritative parenting style teaches a child to stand up to you, and therefore they can stand up to others. And again, they can, have the skills so that they can assert themselves and not engage in as many risky behaviors. The last one is, actually, there's some good research as well on this, and that is parents who know where their children are going, who they're going to be with, what they're going to be doing, and when they're going to be coming home, engage in fewer risky behaviors. Now, there is a danger here of the adolescent viewing you as interrogating them. Where are you going? Who are you going to be with? Interrogating them. The way to avoid this is quite simple. Hopefully, you don't have an adolescent already and you haven't made this mistake. The way to avoid this is you role model this. So from the time your kids understand language, you always tell them where you're going, who you're going to be with, what you're going to be doing, and when you're going to be home. And if you're not going to be home on time, you call. If you do this, by the time the child's 12 or 13, this is just the way the family operates. It's not mom and dad interrogating me. This is just the way our family operates. Knowing where each other is has advantages, certainly in emergency situations, etc. The last thing I want to cover, and good, it's 1 o'clock so we can get through this. The last thing I want to cover is a major issue that, of course, comes up with adolescents. It's a natural phenomenon where adolescents want their independence, and parents, especially because they know about the risk-taking behavior of adolescents, they often actually become stricter as adolescence approaches. And this creates a terrible dynamic where the adolescent wants to be running their own show, their own life, and the parent is worried about them, so the parent becomes stricter and stricter. A lot of my students in my parenting seminar have reported this to me, as well as the literature. One of the ways to avoid this, of course, is to give your child the skills that they will need to run their own life in advance of becoming adolescents. And this means starting actually almost at birth, essentially fostering your children to become independent and autonomous. So they are involved in making their own decisions. I just use one example that a lot of parents will disagree with me, I'm sure, in this audience, that a lot of parents control when their kids do their homework. Well, one of the things that you can allow your child to do is to decide when they're going to do the homework, or what order they're going to do the homework. It's very important for kids to learn how to self-manage before adolescence. If they're good at that, as a parent, then you're relaxed when they enter adolescence. A little, not fully relaxed, but more so relaxed. And that helps. This is also very important. A lot of parents communicate by snooping around in diaries or on email of their child's computer. They communicate they really don't trust and respect their child. So if you really think about it from the child's point of view, if mom and dad already don't trust me, and I do some of the things that mom and dad think I do, I'm not letting mom and dad down, right? I'm not letting them down. And that actually is one of the deterrents. A lot of adolescents will think, well, if I do this, it's going to be letting mom and dad down. That's not the best reason for them not to engage in behavior. Hopefully it's a set of values that you've instilled in them, but it helps. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you communicate, I don't trust you, I have to snoop around in your drawers to see if you have drugs and this kind of stuff. If you do that kind of thing, then you're communicating to them that it's not really going to be a big deal when they actually do what you think they're going to do anyway. But if you say to your child, you communicate to your child that I expect you really to essentially be responsible at all points in time, and adolescence is not an excuse for being irresponsible and doing crazy things, then if they do some of these things, they're obviously going to feel that they're letting you down. There'll be less likelihood that they'll do that. Authoritative parenting style, of course, also becomes important here when it comes to the struggle, because again, you're empowering the child. You're working with the child. The child doesn't see you as a dictator. The child sees you as caring about them and willing to compromise. And so they are essentially learning that they do have power early on, and so they're less motivated when they reach adolescence to have to rebel in order to get that power or control. I've already mentioned this. There's this temptation as they approach adolescence to get stricter, and that really is not a good thing to do. And the last statement is a hard thing for parents to stomach, but I've been told by my kids, and I teach parenting, and I'm married to a school psychologist, but I've been told to my kids, you're the worst dad in the whole world. I wish you weren't my father. Now, the natural response of a parent when this happens is to attack back, to say, you no good for nothing kid, you don't appreciate anything. That only intensifies the tension between you and your child. When you say, you no good for nothing, you don't appreciate me, all these you statements only intensify things. If you use I statements, explaining to the child how what the child said made you feel. So I feel very sad and somewhat upset when I hear you say those things to me because there's nothing more important to me than being a good father. That teaches your child empathy, and that diffuses the tension that's likely to build up when you attack back. Anyway, thanks for your patience. If there are any questions or comments, I'm happy to entertain them.